Hello, hello to everyone here in our group. Buckets of water on a wall, on a church without walls. I've been in a lot of contemplation this week concerning the buckets of water and what he would have me share with each and every one. And good day, good afternoon, depending on when you tune in. Concerning the buckets of water, this is a revelation on touching on what God is doing today, whether it be in the church or the world. And it is to expound on this a little bit because there's been a lot of speculation. And he would have me share what he has brought me to know, and not to speak my opinion, but to simply do it as he brought me to know, to see, as he has told me. And some of it is very contrary to what is being taught, what is being spoken. Buckets of water, to go back to the vision that he showed me concerning pouring buckets of water, living waters, over the church, a church without walls. And to understand the foundation, the waters, these are living waters, and it is by his Spirit, and it is with mercy. And it is to address the relationship, despite how some may perceive that through their religious lens, to see it as religious, because this isn't religious. As with any relationship, it depends on how we understand someone and what they like, what they don't like, and to understand it in that relationship with God, with the Father, with the Son, with the Holy Ghost. And he would have me do it from my prayer chair. So it took me a while to set this up. I had remote set up, and now it doesn't want to work on the live stream. But I'm still going to just go for it. And hopefully you can hear me just fine. Concerning the waters on the church, he would also have me, before I go into more detail, he would also have me touch on when I saw into the Father's eyes. The surface twins, what I call the surface twins on the surface of his eyes, are anger and jealousy. The anger, for me personally, to understand that anger was to recognize it as I have seen, say with my dad, or with another, that he quite clearly and audibly said, this man is an important part of your life. You know, oftentimes when we get to know someone, we try to do our best, I know I have, to avoid being on someone's bad side that provokes them to anger, that would kindle their anger. And so the anger I saw on the surface of his eyes was like this, knowing he could destroy this earth in a New York second. There was no doubt in that. That's how powerful his anger can be. But in that, it was to understand the anger that I was familiar with others that personally could relate to. If I did something or said something that was on the bad side of somebody, that provoked them to anger, it was to be aware of that. It was to do something out of line, to not be in cooperation with the things being worked in love. And so in that, with jealousy, is a very protective jealousy to us personally. He knows the hearts of his people. He knows the hearts of those who love him. And to understand that anger that's working on us to get us in line. Last week was talking in alignment, having dreams in alignment, but in alignment with love. And that's what this comes down to. Anger is against the injustice. Anything we may say or do that's contrary to love. That's not being very compassionate, very understanding. And then the jealousy being protected and worked working in us to get in line with love. But beyond the surface twins, what I call the surface twins, anger and jealousy, beyond that, in his eyes, it is everything hoped and believed and known love to be. Pure, unadulterated love. And in that is the realm of infinity. God is the realm of infinity. He is forever and ever. And it is to behold those things. I will say here, he does want me to bring it up. You know, to see farther into his eyes is to recognize things that his people in the church claim that are demonic, and they're not. They're not at all, but they're unknown. They're spiritual. And these things, you know, here we go with every good and perfect gift. It comes from the Father of lights, without any shadow, without any change in his mind. And so in that is to understand the living waters and mercy, more kindness than justice requires. And we're in an hour where I have made mention of the trees of self-righteousness being flattened out. And he reminded me this week of a place I once was when he had given me 3 instructions that I waited all my life for. And then I found myself in a very, very precarious situation. It was not lined up with him. And I was not in a place that I ever thought I would be to not follow through with those instructions. And in making those corrections, in changing my mind to be in alignment with him, contrary to what I thought, he showed me otherwise, contrary. He showed me otherwise to what I was thinking. And in that, in my own ignorance up to that time, I had used the written word to build up against his spoken word. And how many times we may find ourselves in that situation. Excuse me. I was later than usual getting on, so I didn't bring in any tea or water, so please bear with me as I explain this. But in building up, one thing he would have me also say, in building up our lives with walls based on his written word without his spoken word is a disaster waiting to happen, because his ways are spiritual, and he would have us familiar with his spoken word to understand the meaning of his written word. And then, of course, we have the living word in Christ Jesus. But in this is to also remember the covenant of mercy, and for us to receive more kindness than justice requires. It is his loving kindness more than we know we rightly deserve. And even with what he is working today among the church, his assembly, versus those out in the world, it is his loving kindness to receive his loving kindness that we know we do not deserve. And it's not because of our own righteousness, our own right standing. It's because of his. There is something he would have me share. I made mention of a divine appointment. And it was actually with Sarabayel. And the father and son, they had me in appointment with Sarabayel. And in that were the 4 pillars I mentioned. These are guideposts. What he is doing with the assembly today. And we can't do it without his living waters. We can't do it without the work of his Spirit. The human nature, our humanness, can get so off track so easily. You know, it tends to be our own nature to criticize and judge. That's not love. You know, and with the willingness to understand what he is doing and in his loving kindness. It was to walk the perimeters, to walk the perimeters of the assembly, the church, and with the guidepost, and with those was the string. I understand it with my dad being a bricklayer. You know, when you are setting up brick along a wall, they have string put from one side to the other. It's a guideline, a guide string, a guideline. And in this were strings with the between the guideposts. And along the perimeter there were sinkholes and molehills. Now, to understand that, sinkholes are those, I can relate to that as far as people who tend to think less of themselves than they are and being basically tread down by others. Molehills. People in molehills, they have the superiority, excuse me, they have the superiority complex. They tend to think they're better than others, and they tend to make mountains out of molehills. And in that was the need to level out that playing field, to level out that ground between those that may be stuck in a sinkhole versus those who are pounding their chest on a molehill, and to level out that ground, because again, it's not because of what we may say or do in right standing with him. It's because of him. It's because of his righteousness. And to always remember to keep those things level, that the greatest sacrifice ever, being that Jesus laid his life down for, was to level out that playing field and to have it equal. We all come up short. Doesn't matter if we're in the sinkhole or the molehill. We all come up short, and that's the beauty of grace. So even with what he's working today, there are many in error. And he would, personally to us, his anger being kindled against those heirs, while jealous to keep us in relationship with him, protective to keep in relationship with him. And even concerning the world, the outside world, the circus, the air show, no matter what they say or do, this is, how can I say, to be humbled in relationship with him, no matter how others may consider this religious. Because again, this has everything to do with our spirituality, our heart, our spirit, and our soul. And to have those things in alignment with love. And in that, he is cleaning church. He is cleaning up. He's cleaning his house. And there have been many things that have been taught in error. And we're in an hour where those things are being straightened up. But it is to understand his loving kindness, his mercy, being protected to us. What the enemy may use and try and mean to our harm, God the Father, he is ever faithful to use those things for the good. He works those things to the good for those of us who love him. And he knows. He knows the hearts of his people. And in terms of the world, the circus and the air show, there's been a lot of speculation, and he would have me address this as well. There is a lot of criticism and judgment in those airstrikes, in the air show. But what he's doing right now is he's allowing those who resist and rebel against the very work of love, he is allowing them to measure out their own judgment, to measure out what judgment comes on them. And this does concern me with some things that have been made public on, on the news, whatever you may, anything that's been made public. There are those that are passing a lot of judgment. And it's to remember, and they're also opening a whole other can of worms. But what they don't realize is as they are passing judgment against one man in particular, who was called to be in the position of commander-in-chief, and who was clearly and audibly said he will get the job done. The criticism and judgment being passed what they think is against him. They themselves are guilty of the very things they're accusing him and others of. And it saddened me to hear how there are some that actually spoke up to have punishment to even execute Trump supporters. I was trying not to say his name just to keep this clear of those things, but nonetheless, he would have me bring this up because those who are claiming and pushing for deprogram and to punish, to even execute those who support the one man that God has very clearly, what he has shown me, he has definitely put him in a position that others have misunderstood, and they're going by what they view as being in error. And here we go with the rebellious. The rebellious and those who resist the very hand of love. And so in the world, he's allowing them to dig their own hole, pretty much their own sinkholes. And, it's not for any of us to help them dig. That's on them. Let them dig their own holes. They are measuring judgment upon themselves. And they're giving full opportunity right now to do just that. And those in the church, his living waters and his mercy, what I see is the wind of the Spirit is so blowing now. And in that is his healing, the healing and health, his miracle working power to those who would receive it. And it doesn't mean that those speaking against will receive it. They're working a whole other scenario. And so for those who have been in a sinkhole, you are able. You are able. He would have you know who you are in his eyes by his work, the work of his hand, because of his righteousness, not because of anything you're lacking. We can't do it without him. And at the same time, those on molehills beating their chest, dropping names, self-righteousness. Here we go, in thinking, in building up on the written word, even those religious, building up on the written word without a spoken word. He would have us, he would have us in close relationship to understand where we stand in his eyes, what he's doing, and to cooperate with him. It is working in cooperation with him that is counted as righteousness. And it's because he said, and because of the living word and the mercy, to receive his mercy. There is something else there's two things actually. Two things that he would bring up. Because I made mention before, the reign of twisted truth is over, and it certainly is. And there are things being worked behind the scenes in having the full truth come to the surface. There is a work. He is doing a work. And he would have us who are in relationship with him to understand what that is so we can be in better cooperation with him. Heart, spirit, and soul. And so in that, as far as the twisted truth, there's three things. Okay, he would have me start with, I made mention before, as far as intercessors, skilled intercessors around the assembly, and being sitting next to each other, not hand in hand, but next to each other, side by side. And in that intercession was in allowing his spirit to be released and spoken through us. That is allowing his spirit. He's always doing intercession for us. And he calls on those who know how to intercede. And it's not that intercessor like for me. It's not that I pray my will, I pray his will. And allowing his spirit to speak through me and completing, making those prayers complete, and for the angels to act upon in getting those orders from God. And so in the skilled intercessors that were around the assembly, it was a wall of fire. And God is a consuming fire. In releasing his prayers by his Spirit, it's releasing that consuming fire. And as I mentioned before, in the middle of the assembly was a pentagram. And in that was the worship to the father of lies, to the ruler of demons. And unfortunately, it's been in the church for years. And it has, in minding the things of man, not God, which is very easy to do if we are not discerning between the good and evil and being in that relationship and understanding the Father's loving kindness. And even for Jesus to do what he did out of love for the Father and out of his love for us. These things may seem as a paradox. They're beyond our understanding until we come into his nature, the divine nature, by the work of his hand. And so in that, in the middle of the assembly, and seeing the pentagram and seeing the goat's head, the worship to the father of lies, this has been common, considered tradition among many churches, local churches. Now, I'm not saying all are in error. There are some that are right on, but it's the unity of the wholeness, and this is what I'm addressing. And in the middle, in resisting the hand of God, as in that intercession, in the assembly of the intercessors, releasing perfect prayers, was the very wall in the pureness of the consuming fire, just to blow right through there and remove that from within the assembly. Now, there are those within the assembly, older people, that are more familiar with these teachings that are off. And so, and with younger people coming in to know what the untwisted truth is, there will be a process, and with the need for patience and loving kindness. Another thing he would have me say, because the things that have been denied, and this is something he strongly reminded me of this morning, actually, when I was waking up, and these things need to be cleared and strongly emphasized in the assembly. You know, you must be born again to enter and see into the kingdom of heaven. And unfortunately, there are those who have been taught differently, in denial of the very things we need, that when someone brought a good report from heaven, that it was considered, here we go, it was considered wrong, when those things, they're true. He would have us. That is our divinely given birthright when we enter into new life, to be able to enter and see into the kingdom of heaven. And again, not because of our righteousness, but because of his. We all fall short in that, you know, here we go with the grace. We're all in need of grace. And so another thing he would have me bring up is the twisted teaching, and I'm surprised he has me say it this way, just being honest. There has been a teaching that is backwards. He was bringing me, again, I mentioned as far as he's had me read and reread what Jesus said, and it doesn't always line up with what the church is teaching. Here we go, beware of the leaven, and not throwing the baby out the bathwater. And in that, he was reminding me that when Jesus made mention of the two women at the well, at the grind mill, that there would be a time where one would be taken and there would be one left. And in that, he asked me, what if I told you that is not what has been taught? And we've had a lot of teaching on the rapture. And before anyone assumes where I'm going with this, Jesus also made reference to the wheat and the tares. Tare is, another word for tare is darnel. Darnel is also called a bastard wheat, and it is poisonous, poisonous to both man and beast. And which is interesting because the circus and the air show, there's been a lot of poison. You know, they've passed out the Kool-Aid and they've upped the poison. And there's reasons I say it that way. The bastard wheat are poisonous, the tares. And he did say that when that time comes, that he would have his angels sent forth to uproot and gather the tares, the darnel, the bastard wheat first. Then the wheat, the sons, the children of righteousness in his righteousness will shine forth. And concerning his reign, there is 1,000-year reign coming up, and he did say, blessed are those who endure to the end. So while there are those that are excited for the rapture and beam me up, Scotty, it is to stop and consider, what did Jesus say really? Because it's not the way it's been taught. And again, it is our divinely given birthright when we enter new life, and to have a new heart and a spirit, and his spirit within us, that affects our spirituality. This is a whole new adventure in life, in the way, the truth, and life, in ways that have been misrepresented by certain ones. And it is to remember the mercy. More kindness than justice requires, and we all need his mercy. And so I will close it up there, knowing that the wind of the Spirit, his healing, the Son of Righteousness with healing in his wings, he is coming across the earth. There is healing in health, in the Son of Righteousness. The miracle working power. There are great and mighty things that are taking place right now for those of us who will receive, whether we thought less of ourselves or thought more of ourselves. It is to be humbled, knowing the playing field has been leveled out, and for good reason. And to not make mountains out of molehills and not get stuck on a sinkhole, but to receive his kindness, his loving kindness, and to be inspired, to be encouraged, and to be led by his Spirit, by the very Spirit of God himself. And so I'll leave you on that note, and we'll see you next Wednesday. Real quick, I do want to say, I know there's been a couple of passings today, and one of them being a member in this group, Barb Foster. She had 2 other names in her name, but Barb Foster here, a member in our group, she did pass this morning. She went home, and she welcomed a homecoming party to be back home. And yes, I can say that knowing his loving kindness, not because of Barb's righteousness, but because of his. And she was welcomed home. And I did hear her say, it's beautiful. It's beautiful. And how much more he would have us experience that now while here on earth before we pass. So I will end it there, and I'll see you next week. Have a good one.